stop your grinning and drop your linen. It's the AC/DC Beyond the Thunder podcast with your thunderous hosts, Kurt Squires, Greg Ferguson, and Eric Cube. Are you ready?
Thank you for tuning in once again to AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, the podcast that spotlights the influence that this wicked good band from Australia has had on our culture in truly shocking ways. From well-known actors and athletes, comedians and CEOs, professional wrestlers, to decorated war heroes. And in today's case, a local singer-songwriter who received the biggest spotlight of his life thanks to a friendship and kindred spirit with AC/DC's own Brian Johnson. Hello, Thunder fans. I'm your host, Kurt Squires. That's my good friends right over there, sound man and engineer Eric Kielb. Hey, Eric. Hey. And fellow AC/DC compatriot and co-pilot, Mr. Greg Ferguson. Greg, looks like you're going to have to share the mic with another Greg today. How does that make you feel?
Well, I've got 3 G's in my name, and this Greg only has 2.
This is true. You go by Triple G for a reason.
And you can call me Greg Gaga, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think this is a great guest because he goes way back as far as the original AC/DC Beyond the Thunder days when it was a documentary. You remember those days?
I do. And you actually introduced me to Greg Billings back in the day. You sent me a CD. I was desperately trying to find it. When you told me we were going to interview Greg Billings, I'm like, I got to go listen to the CD. And I couldn't find it. My daughter's been through my CD collection pretty heavy now, and she swipes stuff left and right. But definitely a blast from the past. And I missed that CD, but I did find him on Spotify. So
nice. Well, back in the day, we were introduced to Greg because he had done so many duets with Brian, and they were both Floridians. They're best buddies. And I was like, hey, Greg, why don't we send Greg Billings a little promo of our documentary, and maybe he'll just kind of hand that off to Brian one day. So that's exactly what Greg Billings did for us. So very cool guy, and we've been friends ever since, kind of keeping in touch.
Yeah, he's always been there and willing to help us out, and it's good to know that that package finally made it to Brian Johnson, which is pretty cool.
And you have to tell the listeners what you made. That was pretty awesome.
So at the time, we were trying to get some excitement around our Beyond the Thunder project, and one of the kind of ploys that we had, I got one of those small Marshall amps and cut it in half and thinned it down, and we made it into this cool little package, this presentation. So the amp would flip open, and inside was a note, the DVD, and a few other little trinkets depending on who we were sending it to. And those went out to a few very, very special people.
Yes,
including Brian.
Yeah, I remember Greg Billings getting back to us saying, hey guys, Brian and I sat down, we watched it, and Brian said something to the effect of, if these guys go through this much trouble, then they deserve a shot. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, such a compliment. Well, I'm excited about this episode. Let's get it started.
Okay, as you know, AC/DC have managed to energize and push people from all walks of life to their own potentials, 3 chords at a time. So during this episode of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, we're heading down south for some gator snacks and wash it down with some Okeechobee whiskey as we catch up with Brian Johnson's BFF and fellow Floridian, Greg Billings, who's become the quintessential frontman of the Sunshine State, playing with an incredible roster of musicians over his tenured career, including 3 duets and several live appearances with AC/DC's one and only Brian Johnson. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the soulful Mr. Greg Billings.
Soulful. I get that soul from being a Carolina boy. From a little bit of course, like you mentioned, the Okeechobee whiskey.
Yeah.
I think that's where I get, so you mentioned soulful. That's the only thing I could think of that turned me into a soul boy.
A soul boy from Winston-Salem, right? Home of Krispy Kreme.
I was born and raised in Winston-Salem. Yes, sir. I'm pretty proud of that, actually. I bragged to Brian quite a bit about that. Every now and then he says, this is my friend Greg from South Carolina. I'm like, don't even. There's only one Carolina, and that's North Carolina.
Of course. I love that.
I'm proud to be a Tar Heel.
I'm still stuck in Maine, so there you go.
I read where your dad was a career Navy guy who did a lot of traveling, wasn't home much, but it was your mom who really raised you and you watched her play the piano, which made a huge impression on you musically, right?
She always had a piano in the house. Once we settled down, my dad was in the Navy, like you said. My mom was a great soul. Everybody that met her knows she just loved everybody, no matter what she thought about some of my friends, because some of them were trouble. She was always, welcomed them into our house. And after a couple drinks, she would get on the piano and sing. And I think she probably wanted to take music a little further, but she had 3 kids and a husband that was in the Navy, so
Sure.
she couldn't. So therefore, I think maybe that's why she pushed me into the music. She never said no to me when it came to, starting a band or being getting into music.
I love that. So you carried this torch for the love of music. And by the time you were a teenager, you began singing in bands heavily influenced by rock greats at the time, such as Alice Cooper, Deep Purple, Grand Funk, and even Skynyrd. So, by the way, when did AC/DC first come onto your radar screen? What was the very first AC/DC track or album you ever heard? And how did their brand of music hit you at the time?
A friend of mine, his name is Teddy Pope, loved music, and he turned me on to a lot of great stuff. Kansas comes to mind right away that I'd never heard of, but he said, look at this band, AC/DC. I said, this is good. This is cool stuff, but I was still a more of a Southern rock guy up until probably Highway to Hell came out.
That makes sense. And that's the one that got you, though.
Well, it got a lot of people, because before that, what I always thought of AC/DC was they're great, but they're that band that hard rockers listen to because you never heard them on the radio, unless you were listening to some college station or something.
Right.
And then Highway to Hell came out, and I was like, oh my God, And then, of course, as I got older, my voice changed a little bit. It wasn't so whiny. People started kind of comparing my voice to Bon Scott's voice a little bit.
Wow. Yeah. Right.
By the time Highway to Hell came out, I don't think we did it in the early days of Stranger, but of course we did it jamming with other bands over the years. But that song always made in my wheelhouse. Some of the stuff that Bon Scott does, I can't quite get to. Highway to Hell is right there in my wheelhouse.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was going to be one of my questions is, do you ever get compared to Bon Scott? Because your vocal tonal quality is very similar to Bon's.
I haven't met anyone that was in the studio with him at all, so I don't have an answer to that, but I'm hoping that he sang a little bit with less volume because it makes me feel better. Some of that stuff is really, really tough to hit, but
oh, it's brutal.
Let There Be Rock, Dirty Deeds, TNT, all that stuff, those are easy songs for me.
Really? And they're not easy for most people.
It's the range, 'cause I think most of their stuff was in E and A, and that's right in my wheelhouse.
So eventually you make a trek to Florida. You're playing beach bars and nightclubs, trying to get things going. Basically a full-time lifestyle for you, party, play, repeat. And in the 80s, it was you and Tom King who formed the rowdy Southern rock band called Romeo, originally called Romeo. And you were eventually discovered by record producer Tom Werman of Motley Crue fame, who signed you to Epic Records, correct?
Yeah, at the time, it was probably Motley Crue fame, but he had done Ted Nugent. He had done Mother's Finest, who I was a huge fan of, Cheap Trick. And yes, he did come out to a show one night, and it was ladies' night, and there was probably 300 women and probably 100 dudes. And these record people were like, who is this band? And they all came to see our guitar player, Ronnie Garvin. He was a really good looking guy and great guitar player, and the girls loved him. I was the singer guy that was in the background most of the time.
But you did have some pretty awesome hair, right?
That's pretty good hair. But those guys saw us and signed us. We were signed to a record deal within like 2 months after that, after they saw us.
And this is when you changed your name to Stranger, correct?
Yeah, we did. We were out in LA actually doing the record, and the record company did not like the name Romeo. The only guy that looked like a Romeo was our guitar player. So there was a band called Romeo Void, I think, also at the time. So we went out to a show to see Kevin Dubrow, who ended up being the singer for Quiet Riot.
Right.
We saw his band. He didn't have a record deal at the time, so we went to visit him and see his show. And no chicks gave us a second look, or nobody. They wouldn't talk to us. So I told Ronnie, I said, I feel like a stranger in this place.
Ah,
That's where the name Stranger came from.
there it is.
Cool.
And Stranger opened shows nationally for Triumph, Quiet Riot, UFO, Skid Row, Aldo Nova, Tesla, King's X, Eddie Money. The list goes on. Other big name acts of the time. And it looked like Stranger was poised to become the next big thing, right? Or the next Van Halen.
Yeah, well, when I first joined Romeo, Ronnie was one of the few guitar players that could do all that Eddie Van Halen stuff, and we did a lot of Van Halen. We were very popular around town, of course, so we got a lot of opening slot. Triumph and Saxon, we've played like 3 shows with those guys, Tampa, Orlando, and I think Daytona Beach. Opened for Nazareth quite a few times.
Love Nazareth.
Cool.
And then we got on tour with UFO, and Aldo Nova was the middle act.
Okay.
And that lasted about 6 weeks, and that was all out west.
Wow, that's quite a run.
After our record came out, that's what you did back then. You did a record, then you went out on tour, and they paid you like $200 a night.
Wow.
To open shows so you could sell albums.
Right.
It was a trip.
So by 2003, you finally felt a calling to run your own gig, and you struck out to form the Greg Billings Band, which was not just rock, but it included many soul and rhythm and blues classics. And so by 2008, your first Greg Billings Band album called Do-Overs was released. It was 2008, right?
Yeah, I think we started recording that around 2006, and it took us about a year and a half.
And I noticed in the liner notes of that album, it says, I've become good friends with Donald Duck Dunn and Brian Johnson over the last 15 years. How did that friendship start way back then?
Well, me and Brian, of course, met. His wife was a fan of Stranger.
Oh, okay.
She came to see us several times and finally brought Brian out. We ended up playing golf together, me and Brian, and we've been buddies ever since. Later on, Brenda and my wife, Tish, became best of friends.
Nice.
That led into more and more visits to their house.
That's great.
Whether me and Brian wanted to hang out together or not, it was the girls want to go down, they want to get together. So me and Brian were gladly to oblige and do whatever they wanted, but we became really good friends after that.
Very cool. And since Dunn had actually played on the original Wilson Pickett track, Midnight Hour, he was kind enough to dust off his bass and join you in the studio. And then when you asked Brian if he was in, he said, I'd do anything for a Carolina boy, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Brian introduced me to Duck, and Duck was a hard guy to get to know because Duck has been through a lot. And I heard a lot of the stories with Otis, Booker T and MGs. He didn't trust a lot of people in the music business. So it took a while for me to befriend Duck. It took a while, a lot of late nights with Brian and Duck, staying up after the girls went to bed. And I was like, Duck, I said, we're gonna redo Midnight Hour, and I'd love to have you up. This is after we're drunk, of course, having drinks. And he goes, absolutely, I'll do it. And then Brian's in the background. He heard me and Duck talk about it. He goes, and I'm gonna sing on it.
That's great.
That's how that was born. The next day I said, Brian, do you remember saying you would sing on this? And he's like, absolutely, I got you covered. So within 3 or 4 weeks, I had a car down there to pick him up and brought him into the studio.
Classy.
To record that. The classic line was, Ducks asked us if he wanted, do you guys want me to play this like I played it on Wilson Pickett's record? And of course, we all looked at each other and said like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
this is going to be so good.
Yeah.
And the way he plays it on the record is a little different than most people play it. After that, there's a little thump in there on each quarter note.
Yeah.
He added that to the song to pick it up a little bit. And that's the way he played it with us as well.
Oh, man. That's amazing, Greg. 2 Rock and Roll Hall of Famers joining you on a classic track. What was that like in the studio?
Man, I'm telling you something, dude. I think back on it. I had a friend send me some pictures because I'm kind of revisiting some of my past. That night that we did that song, we had one mic for me and Brian, and it was in the control room. We weren't isolated at all. We were in the same room with like 10 guys, and we were drinking and partying. So me and Brian are feeding off all this energy, and we just handed it off to each other.
Old school.
And then the last verse, we just sang like at the same time into this 57. And it was raw, it had energy, and it was like maybe 2 takes. And the reason it was 2 takes because the ad-lib stuff we did at the end.
Yeah.
But it was a special moment.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when there's no one else around. I'm gonna take you, girl, and hold you, and do all the things I told you in the midnight hour. Just you and I. Look at here. I'm gonna wait till the stars come out and see the twinkle in your eyes. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love begins to shine. You're the only girl I know that really loves me so in the midnight hour. Just you and I.
And I have to say, you paired so nicely with the vocal grit of Brian Johnson on that track. And we had recently discussed about you sounding like Bon Scott. At some points, it was almost like, wow, this might have been what a duet with Bon and Brian might have been like. You must have been so ecstatic recording that.
I was excited when it came out for people to hear us, to see how it would blend together. And of course, we did do a couple of lines in unison, and you could definitely tell both voices apart.
Oh, yeah.
It showed a great side of Brian because he's a soulful kind of guy as well.
Yes.
A lot of people had not seen that side, or excuse me, had not heard that side of Brian. Thought it was a really good presentation, and actually we are remixing that entire record right now and going to remaster it.
Cool.
I actually remember hearing a quote from AC/DC producer Brendan O'Brien, who was working with Brian Johnson on his vocals, and eventually he came to the conclusion. He looked at Brian, he calls him by both names apparently. He said, "Brian Johnson, you're a soul singer." And Brian's like, "What? Do you concur with that label?"
I agree with that to a certain extent. Brian is a soul guy because he's got a good soul, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes from a hard-working background. He's seen a lot, man. This guy, I mean, I've heard the stories. You've read the book,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also some stories that weren't in the book. That guy worked his ass off.
Yeah, he did.
He was a proud man, and I think that's where his soul comes from.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's a Wilson Pickett or he's an Otis Redding. I'm not. A lot of guys aren't. But he feels that stuff, and I think that's where he probably got off saying Brian was a soul singer because a lot of guys didn't see that in him in the early days. They just wanted him to sing as hard as he could, loud as he could, and as high as he could.
That's right.
A good tribute to that Black Ice record. It brought out a little bit of soul in Brian.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of my favorite records.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Black Ice.
That's a very cool choice. Well, for me, the first instance of being aware of the Greg Billings Band was because of this duet with Brian, which must have been great exposure for you. And I remember ordering a physical CD from the Greg Billings Band site, and you sent me an extra copy in the mail with a handwritten note, which said, "Stay in touch." And it was really thoughtful. And we've sort of kept in touch ever since, which I've actually really treasured. And it's really nice to have kept that connection.
Yeah, I try to write a little note on all my packages. If I know a lot of the people that order my stuff, but I think it makes it a little bit personal. I don't think people that order my stuff are fans. I've always said that they're friends. I recognize their names, and I probably had a drink with everybody that orders my stuff.
That's great.
The overseas people, I really reach out and send them nice notes and send them nice emails thanking them. But that's funny that you say that, Kurt, because that Do-Overs record did really good. And I was always proud when I got an order in the mail and I was going to mail it out. And I always wanted to find out what people were about that was ordering this, especially after the Brian song.
Yeah.
So the Brian stuff, a lot of people sent me great messages. Some people are like, I would say 98% of the feedback was positive.
Wow. I've become a big fan, especially collecting over the years as Greg Billings continued to release CDs. Well, at the time, Greg Ferguson and I were filming this documentary about AC/DC and trying to get that off the ground. And Greg made this awesome promotional amp, and inside of it, it opened up and it was a part of our film. And we sent it to you hoping that, hey, maybe Greg Billings will send this to Brian one day. And, of course, the film never really got off the ground, but it turned into a podcast where we get to talk to you.
Yeah, and I've talked to Brian. Brian knows all about you guys. He knows you. He knows all about your adventures. And I did deliver that package, by the way.
Oh, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
He just gets so much stuff. It's crazy, man. You would not believe the stuff that he gets in the mail. And you wouldn't believe the stuff he gets. People come to his door.
Oh,
wow.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting it from all sides.
I bet.
I just spent the week with Brian, and he's all excited about the PowerTrip thing.
Oh, yes, I am too. I'm very excited.
That's going to be on his birthday, that gig.
Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah, he turns 76.
That is insane.
He's so fired up. They're going to rehearse, I think, for 5 weeks.
I would hope so, because it must be weird for them to be able to just jump on stage cold, because they haven't played since 2016, and they weren't even with Brian that whole tour.
Yeah, so he's excited about doing this. They did the whole record without really getting together much.
Yeah.
The last record that they did.
Yeah.
And so they're excited. They're going to spend 5 weeks together, doing nothing but playing 2 hours. I think it's going to be a 2.5 hour show or something like that.
Wow. That's awesome. I look forward to it. Are you going?
As of now, I will not be going, but if Brian needs some help carrying his luggage, I'll be there for him.
That's very nice of you.
I can help carry too.
Yeah. I should probably try to make an effort, because it means a lot to him, I think.
Yeah.
Because, you never know what's going to happen with these guys.
Right.
But he's got a big heart, and he's fired up about this. He's been getting in shape for the last 6 weeks already. So
unbelievable.
I might have ruined his get in shape the week we spent together last week, but he'll get back on track.
Oh, well, at least you guys had fun, right?
Yeah, we had a blast.
Well, I wanted to talk about more Brian Johnson duets, because you just seem to have the knack to get him in the studio. One CD, actually, before you had a duet, was called Live with No Sauce Needed. And I noticed when you were coming on stage, it came with a DVD. When you're approaching on stage, I could hear Rock and Roll Train playing in the background, which was a nice little touch.
Yeah.
And you did your best Brian Johnson impersonation on stage with the...
Was that Midnight Hour?
Yeah. You traded off...
I think it was.
You traded off parts, even though Brian wasn't there. You put on the cap and you did like a little Jekyll and Hyde thing, which was really fun.
Yeah, I always like a lot of guys, I take my own music for intro music, and it's always an AC/DC song, always.
Wow.
It just works. For my last song, last show at Ruth Ecker Hall for the Greg Billings Band, it was Have a Drink on Me. So that was the one that got people really excited right before we came out. And of course, Brian came out and introduced the band that night. It was pretty hip.
That's cool.
How special is that? And I had tickets to that show. And Greg and I had to travel somewhere all of a sudden, and I was unable to attend, but I was going to travel down from Carolina, and I think I was able to give them to a couple of your friends, which is...
I think so, because there wasn't an empty seat in the house, so I'm sure your tickets were used.
Good, yeah. What a nice cap to your 35-year career. How cool is that?
Yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun.
So are you able to show our listeners an example of your velvety voice, or do you need time to warm up for something like that?
Warm up makes it sound worse. So when I approached Brian about Old Friends Don't Come Easy, I had to sing it to him, of course. So it was like, do you remember the time you left me locked outside? You laid drunk on the floor, had to sleep by the door in the rain. There you go.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow. Man, you got it. You got the soul. I love that. That sounds so good. Yeah, that was a great track. I loved that song. In fact, I love that album. It's called Boom Boom All Night. It's one of my favorites from you. Sonically, it sounds amazing. In fact, Eric, can you cue up Boom Boom All Night? I would just love to hear. I want to see Greg's expression just listening to this opening track. I love it.
There she stood in the corner, looking mighty fine to me. She was good, and now I want her. She was digging April wine and feel free. Oh, that girl, couldn't help it. Looked so good, it felt so right.
Sounds so good.
So good.
Musicians you found are so good. You surround yourself with some amazing people. Not to sell yourself short, but
That might be my, I think it's probably my favorite record too, the Boom Boom All Night record, because by that time, we had seasoned into a pretty damn good band. In the early days, we were trying a lot of different stuff, and I think we found our niche because I met Jeff Abraham, and we wrote 6 songs together for that album, including Boom Boom All Night, and Old Friends Don't Come Easy came up. I was like, dude, this is a great song. And When the Night Comes Down, Superman, there's some really cool tracks on there.
yeah.
And that's why the record sounds probably the best in all of them, because the band had been together for quite a while, and all these songs were pretty fresh. Fast Train is one of my
Yes.
favorites.
That's a great one. That's a great one. And I remember you had actually reached out to and we're excited. You're like, Kurt, check out the back cover. You're going to love it. And it was a illustration of Uncle Brian jamming with you. And I was like, oh my God, he got him in the studio again. This is going to be great.
It was not easy this time for Old Friends Don't Come Easy. It wasn't, because Brian was down.
Right.
We actually talked about this with my sit down with Brian for my podcast. He was in a bad place, man.
Right.
The ear situation that he had, he couldn't hear, and he had some surgeries, and he explains it all in my sit down with him. But he was in a bad way, man, and I knew it. So I was like, dude, this song is perfect for you.
Really was.
You need to come out of your house. You need to come sing this and let people know that you're still alive, man, and you can still do this. And originally he said no, because he was afraid he couldn't do it.
Wow.
And I was just getting ready to go in with Robin Zander was going to sing Brian's part
Okay.
in the song. And it was probably only about 4 days away from Robin coming in. And Brian called and says, I'm in.
Wow.
I want to do this.
That's awesome.
I want to do this. So I found a studio down in Bradenton, where it was just going to be me and Brian. And I told the guy from Braden, I said, you can't tell anybody about this. So it was just me, Brian, my guy, George Harris, my guitar player and producer, and a friend of Brian's, and that was it.
Wow.
Because I didn't want, if he couldn't do it, it was going to be like only 3 people saw it.
Yeah.
But he did great, and he was nervous. I don't, the guy's he sang Back in Black, How can you be nervous? That's a whole nother story there too. The stories I've heard from that.
Yeah, I bet.
And we got through it, and we did some ad libs at the end, at the end where we go, let's get another drink, Greg. And I'm like, oh yeah. So
I love that.
it got some energy, and we pieced it all together. And a lot of his fans were very happy to hear Brian's voice on that.
Yeah.
A lot of people wanted to hear it. There probably about 150,000 people have listened to that song on YouTube.
Wow.
Which is a lot for us, because we never had that many hits.
Right.
And like I said, once again, 98% of the comments were great. Some people are like, who is this? The Georgia Skyrockets or something, because it's so Southern sounding for Brian. But I was proud of it. And I was proud of Brian for getting up and doing that. And of course, when it came out, Brian was reaching out to me saying, all my friends are reaching out to me. They they love the song. They love hearing me sing. And, he really appreciated the opportunity. And that's just the kind of guy he is. He's got a lot of friends, and
Yeah.
everybody was reaching out saying, you're good, man. You're not sick. You can do this. So
That's awesome.
it was a big moment for me. And I think it was a big moment for Brian as well. And it was a pretty good shot in the arm for him to be able to pull that song off.
It's not the way I remember. 94 in November. Ooh, you call me a crying, said your girlfriend's lying, hurt your pride. Well, you went down at the bar, pushed it a little bit too far. I never heard you knocking, 'cause easy talk was working nationwide. Don't you know that old friends don't come easy? Old friends don't come easy. Old friends don't come easy. Sometimes they don't come at all.
Hey, although AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is free to our listeners, if you enjoy the program and believe in what we're doing, consider donating as little as $1 to the show, and 100% of the profits goes directly to the Make-A-Wish and Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy Foundations. If you do, we just may call you out on our show, like Eddie Coyle, Brandon Stone, and Eric Mingy. We salute the AC/DC Beyond the Thunder community for leaning in. Simply go to beyondthethunder.com, hit the charity button, and that's it. I'm sure he treasures your friendship, and we actually sent him one of our custom Jack Daniels bottles that we had sent the Greg Billings band.
Yeah.
We sent one to
I
Brian.
still got it.
Oh, you,
Okeechobee whiskey bottle, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah.
you mean there's still whiskey in there?
I believe so. Yeah, because that's Jack. If I drink Jack, I'll fight somebody. So I hold back on that a little bit.
But yeah, we sent one to Brian and said, have a drink on us. Thanks for, just trying to cheer him up a little bit, But that he must have treasured you doing that.
Yeah, and we touched on that, like I said in my interview with him, and he was willing to talk about it. He let me in on everything that happened there.
Oh, that's great.
For him to show up like that, middle of the day, and give it all he had, and ended up being very proud of that.
Wow. Well, it's also the reason why you're his favorite singer. In fact, I saw an interview where they were interviewing Brian in a hotel room, and they said, "Who's some of your favorite singers?" And he said, "Greg Billings."
Yeah, but the guy was like, "Who's that?" If you're listening to Brian, and if you know Brian well enough, you know my name just from like the 3 songs that we've done together and the times he's mentioned me.
Yeah.
And he actually had a radio show on the BBC for, I don't know, this was probably 8-9 years ago, I think, or something like that. And it was a series where he played his favorite songs. And it went on for like several weeks. That it was every Wednesday night or something. And he actually included Thank You for Loving Me, which is a song he wrote. And it was on Greg Billings' band, Built for Love album.
Yeah.
And he mentioned, this is my favorite singer, Greg Billings. I was like, oh my
man.
God.
Love that guy.
And so many people heard that because everybody tuned into that show. So I was very proud of that.
That's great. Brian kind of pulled out his own Barry White voice for that one.
Yeah. He the reason we did that was because he showed up and I'd already done the song. All the vocals were done. And Brian goes, look, this sounds great like it is. I'll sing on the choruses. You can hear him singing unison on the choruses, but he wrote that song for his wife on Valentine's Day because he forgot it was Valentine's Day.
Uh-oh.
And he got to the restaurant, he sees all these roses and candles burning. He goes, oh my God. And Brenda's like, oh, it's okay. He goes, no, I got to do something. So he grabbed a napkin and actually wrote a song that night.
Wow.
And I had heard it about 6 months later because him and one of his buddies were actually putting a version of it together.
Okay.
About a year later, I said, Brian, that song you wrote, Thank You for Loving Me, do you mind if I record this for the new album I'm working on? He was like, are you kidding me? I said, yeah, man. So we kind of we kind of rearranged it and took it to the band. And when Brian got there to sing on it, he's like, man, I can't improve this. There's nothing I can do. It's a lovely very commercial kind of song. He goes, I said, well, why don't you just do instead of a solo, why don't you do your Barry White, your best Barry White, I love you, baby, that kind of thing. And he did, but he is singing unison on the choruses. And that's all he wanted to do on that song. But he wrote that song, and I was very glad that he agreed that we play that. And that's the one he played on his radio show. And I got tons of email
Oh, that's awesome.
about that song.
You got Brian Johnson to sing on a ballad, which he probably hasn't done since his Geordie days, which is phenomenal.
Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being there. I want to tell you, girl, you are a love affair. Thank you for being strong. You help me carry on. Thank you for being kind when I am out of line. Thank you for being in my heart.
He can sing. He can do anything, Brian can. He's great, man.
Yeah.
Very creative, always thinking. His mind's always going. He's just a good cat, man.
And you guys seem to always be, like you said, chumming around. Like I'll reach out and you'll say, hey, I just got back from fishing with Brian in the British Virgin Islands, or hey, I'm having a pint
Oh,
with
man.
Brian in England right now. I'm like, wow. He's such a good human being.
Yeah, we've had a couple of trips to British Virgin Islands together.
That's awesome.
Each time was a week, and our wives get along so good, and me and Brian just kind of hang out, do our thing, and watch the girls have fun.
Love it. Well, besides being a great singer, great performer, you definitely have some mojo going where you might not have made it to the major leagues, but you definitely have major league talent. And it's awesome to see the people that you hook up with, from Rick Derringer to Robin Zander, you mentioned, from Cheap Trick, members of Paul McCartney's band, and of course, Duck Dunn and Brian. It's pretty awesome little success story you have there.
Yeah, well, whenever you have me back on, we'll touch base with the night that I had. Brian was in attendance. We'll touch base on that wedding that I did where Robert Plant was in attendance and Cyndi Lauper. And,
What?
Wow.
yeah, Kid Rock,
That's crazy.
Dee Snider, they all got a thing with us. So
Wow.
Plant was great. Robert Plant was awesome. So that's for a whole nother show.
That's a whole other show. Wow.
And Brian was sitting right there the whole night watching the whole thing. So
Well, I remember seeing some live footage from a 5-year celebration at a local pub. Is it the Irish Rover, maybe?
oh yeah.
And Brian joined you live to sing like half a dozen AC/DC songs.
We actually rehearsed that whole situation. He used my band and another guy to play rhythm guitar, and we probably rehearsed about 3 hours for that set.
Wow.
And I think we did about 8 AC/DC songs, and God, that's probably been 12 years ago now.
That was
a nut house.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Got a lady and you wanna go, but you ain't got the guts. She been nagging at you night and day, enough to drive you nuts. Pick up the phone, leave her alone. It's time to make a stand. What is it? For a fee, I'm happy to be. One more. Come on, keep it coming.
So listeners, if you go to YouTube, just type in Brian Johnson, Greg Billings live, that'll come up.
Yeah, they will come up.
Yeah, they're really fun. And Brian's he's just a local boy in that sense, right?
Yeah, it was a local boy with about 1,000 people under this tent that held like 300 people.
Wow.
It was a crazy night that night. It was a good one though.
Wow. I wanted to talk about, before we let you go, What the Hell Have I Done, which is your new podcast, a play on words looking back at your entire career in music. which is a great platform for you because you're a great storyteller. How's that podcasting world been treating you?
It's a little different because a lot of my friends, not fans, friends, a lot of people don't quite know what a podcast is right now. So I'm trying to educate them on this.
Yeah.
As yourself and a lot of people with kind of creative minds maybe sit around and they forget what they've done in the past. And I make sure people know that the name of my podcast is "What the Hell Have I Done?" ? Not I want you to tune in to listen to me talk about what the hell have I done?
Right.
I'm not bragging. I just wanted to remember things that I might have forgotten. And some of these shows have helped me to sit down and write and bring up notes, people I want to talk to about things we've done in music business and my friends growing up. No matter what it is, I got to recall this stuff because there's a lot of things happen when you're young that you just don't remember. First of all, you're young and you think everything's going to be hunky-dory for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So you just kind of do these things and just keep moving forward. But I want to retrace my steps. And the first episode starts back when I'm in the first grade.
Love it.
And starts from there and talks about my mom and how I got into music at an early age. So it's fun for me. I've got a list of people I'm going to have on my show and do a couple of these a month and see how it goes. It's good for me. Like I said, it's good for my mind.
Yep.
And I'm excited about it. I'm glad you reached out to me because now I know how I can get some answers to some of my questions I have. I'm going to reach out to you and Greg, Kurt. It's a great adventure for me because it's got me thinking. I'm getting on up there in age. I want to retrace this stuff before I'm not around anymore. So this could take me 10 years to retrace all this stuff I've done.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you've been doing this for a long time, and we appreciate you coming on the show. And I look forward to the Brian Johnson episode. Well, we'll close out here by saying, AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is about how many different individuals have been influenced by this band in many different ways. And obviously their influence is quite different with you, with your friendship with Brian. But how has AC/DC influenced you in a unique way, Greg?
Well, I could tell you it's influenced me by never giving up.
Yeah.
No matter how long breaks these guys took between the records, they were always thinking about the next step, what they were going to do. Brian never sat back and said, look, I'm a rock star. I'm going to go spend my money. I'm going to live life of luxury and do nothing all day. That's not his makeup. That's not how he does it. He's always wanting to work.
Yeah.
Always wanting to be creative, always wanting to do stuff to help people as well. So that's how I'm not so much the music and the band, but a guy like Brian being in that band. Plus, why get out of your, a band like AC/DC? They don't get away from their comfort zone. Why do that? Stick with what got you there and just keep doing it. That's how it's really influenced me quite a bit. And I will end on this note. I was with Brian last week and somebody sent him a video. This is how influential this band has been. It was an interview with Zelensky from Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And they asked him how he started his day and how he had so much energy. And he replied, I start my day with a workout and I listen to AC/DC.
Yes. I love that.
And Brian was so proud to hear this. And it really made his day. And just to know that people all around the world listen to that guy's music.
Yes.
And to get them energized.
That got us energized too. That's kind of what our show is about, and influencing even politicians and leaders. It kind of shows you the power of music, and we'll try to get Zelensky on the show.
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous about getting him on. I'm sure we'll be tapped and wired and all that good stuff, but hey, it's worth it, right?
Well, I love music and it brings people together. I know it sounds cliche-ish, but my story is when we're playing music, I'll tell people, look, 2 hours ago, this stage was empty. There was nothing on this stage.
Yeah.
2 hours later, we've got gear and we're playing music and people are dancing. And then 2 hours after we're done, the stage is going to be completely empty again. It only happens when we're together. It only happens, music happens when people get together and make it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, if I had to sum up Greg Billings in one sentence, it might be from one of your tracks, and it's called Have a Good Time All the Time. Is that directly from a Spinal Tap quote?
Have a good time all the time. Have a good time. Good time.
Nice. Well, thank you, Greg Billings. And actually, we have to leave you with one last question, which is the question we ask every guest on the show, which is if you had one word to describe AC/DC, what would your word be?
To be honest, the first thing that came up was thunder.
AC/DC Beyond the Thunder theme song, Trailer Trash, written and performed by Gannon Arnold. VO talent by Bruce Jacobson. Cinematography and sound recording by Greg Ferguson. Edited and mixed by Eric Keel. Written, directed, and hosted by Kurt Squires. Produced by Greg Ferguson, Eric Keel, and Kurt Squires. AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is a Squires LLC current motion production. Copyright Beyond the Thunder podcast, all rights reserved. This has been a Nat-Attack presentation.
Shazbot Nanu Nana.
This season, there's something we wanted to talk to all of our AC/DC Beyond the Thunder listeners about that's really important to us. As you know, what we do here is free of advertisements, so there's no revenue stream coming into this show. This is strictly a passion project. But if you enjoy the program and you believe in what we're doing, we're asking to donate what you can to each episode of AC/DC Beyond the Thunder podcast. By doing so, you contribute to making dreams come true through the Make-A-Wish and Nordoff Robbins Music Therapy Foundations. And 100% of those profits go directly to these deserving causes. How can you help? Simply go to beyondthethunder.com and hit the charity button before or after listening to each episode, and that's it. Even if you give $1, $2, $5, Greg, Eric, and I would be so thankful, and we salute the AC/DC Beyond the Thunder community for leaning in. That's beyondthethunder.com.